Okay, this is a message for President Zelenskyy. I heard you and more people are saying that your nation must win the war. So it makes me very sad to belong to a species that thinks that there are winners in war. Okay, and I kind of know what you mean by that. Now, I understand where you're coming from. I understand where your passion is, and it would be hard to reconsider your passion because you've got so much support for being that kind of president. Except that you're the same kind of president or leader in history that chooses a path that continues the very concept of war, including your country. No way will your country not be involved in more wars in the future with your approach to this entire thing. I don't even think it's possible for you to have a human approach because you'd be like deposed or murdered by your own people because they wouldn't get it. They wouldn't get somebody who talks in the way that I've talked about war, including to my own government, including to people that had won medals in the Canadian Army, who claim to care about their grandkids, but who still promote the idea of war, which, by the way, includes violence, okay? And by the way, violence is the last refuge of the incompetent. That means when we engage in violence as a species that's been around for that long with a brain this big, it means our intellectual laziness is off the charts. Because violence or faith on a daily basis, faith is a phenomenon that should be rarely used if we have a good variety of different types of intelligence and human thinking tools. For people to use faith on a daily basis, I tell you, they only need a brain this big. Because faith, as much as violence, is a tool of last resort when you've run out of the other options, which you should extremely rarely run out of. So again, for me, like I had to defend myself against a bully in elementary school where, I just had to do it. And I didn't enjoy it. And I was ashamed of myself, and I was ashamed of belonging to a society where I'd be more likely to get praise for that response from adults who should not have allowed situations like this to manifest if they want to call themselves adult humans. And I knew this as a kid. Something's wrong with my species. So I don't need violence in my life. I don't need faith in my life. I know they are tools that I may be in situations that I have to use. And I know that you believe you are justified in this way. But if somebody like you ever had time to have a conversation with me about how I would act differently in the situations that you've been in, well, first of all, your brain couldn't let in these things. Even if I spoke fluently your own language, there'd be no place for it. And that's what I call psychological schemas. So it has to be built over time so you can grasp these simple concepts of how an Homo sapien would act in the same situations. So on March 15th, I dedicated a song to you. You look like more of a Captain America than anybody in the United States, for example, as a character. But a month later, when I noticed the pattern of the choices that you had made now that your voice had become so powerful on an international stage, on April 15th last year, I undedicated this song to you. But I have to post now because it seems very much more likely that you may be the one that has the most options about how to respond, and therefore could choose responses that aren't as emotional, although you're very composed most of the time. But they are emotional responses. They're not responses of a systems thinker that thinks about the future of their own people and the others that will interact with your own people so you're not in wars again. And that takes a systems thinker that incorporates future generations. It takes a socio-cyberneticist, which I claim to be. And I've never met anybody else, so if there ever were any other socio-cybernetics that I could confirm in conversation, I don't know how much better or worse that I'd be than them. I just know I've tried to find some and I can't find any. So I know that our species as a whole barely uses the higher functions of their brains, because I've tried looking for that elusive Homo sapien that would respond to certain situations in certain ways if they really possessed sentience and sapience, and it came to them naturally, these responses. So, President Zelenskyy, you are still one of the greatest men I've ever met on the internet in the last year or few years, but I got to say that still you may very much go down in history as having more choices in how to respond to the stimuli in your life than Putin. Putin is, he's consistent. You know, he's less likely to deviate and he has less choices. You have a lot more choices in not just how war will end for your country, but how the concept of war may or may not be repeated for our species for the rest of the generations of the kids that you claim to care about. If you ever can hear this, we can have a conversation.